Hi, welcome back to episode 6 of the Second Chance Queen podcast. Tonight we're going to be interviewing a very special guest. Her name is Amber Rosenberry, and she is International Ms. Oregon 2024. She is one of my system sisters, and I am super excited to be interviewing her tonight. Amber Rosenberry is the 2024 International Ms. Oregon, an ambassador for the Still She Rose organization, and a global advocate for stalking prevention and awareness. She convinced the state of Oregon to modernize their stalking law and is a continuous advocate for awareness and healing around the world. I am super excited to talk about these topics tonight with Amber. Stalking is something that a lot of times can go hand in hand with abuse, and prior to my abuse history, I did have my own incident of stalking. So I definitely think this topic hits home, and I think a lot of women can relate to this, and I'm really excited to hear what she has to say. I would love for you, I've already given your intro to the listener, so I would love for you to tell in your own words what the second chance story that pops into your mind, whatever that story is. I'd love for you to explain that in your own words.
There have been a lot of second chances, and each one of them has moved me towards being able to take a second chance for myself. We could talk about childhood trauma. We could talk about loss. We could talk about unhealthy coping mechanisms. We could talk about getting run over by an 18-wheeler. We could talk about medical crises. But what brought me all the way here, what brought me into pageantry, what brought me to you was surviving a stalking scenario. And when I'm talking about this, if you've seen Game of Thrones, there's a character who delights in hunting human prey, kind of like a deer.
Ooh.
And really what he delights in is enhancing their terror, maximizing their terror. It's not even about capturing or killing, it's the terror that can be manifested. And that was my stalker.
Ooh.
But because I'd had
That
so
is
many experiences
terrifying.
previously, I was a little more tenacious. I was a little more prepared to say, no, I didn't survive all those other things just to go down this way. I was ready. I was ready to, for the first time, not just be gifted a second chance, but to demand that I get one.
I love that. That's such an insightful way to put that, to demand that you got one. I think that's just so powerful.
Well, that was the hard part. I was going through the experience. It turned out Oregon didn't have laws against this
Oh,
behavior.
wow.
If this was happening across the border in another state, to our right, our left, I guess we don't really have a left. We have an ocean. Further south, there would have been some laws that would have been able to allow someone to intervene and help. And we didn't. So I really had to take it for myself. I really had to turn around and demand that this wasn't going to be how I went down.
I love that. Now, was your stalking experience someone that you knew, or was it
I had dated him for a few months, and when I said no thank you, it turned out that wasn't an acceptable answer. This is someone who just didn't have healthy coping mechanisms in place. He didn't like how I made him feel, therefore I had to be punished, or I had to be made to feel as icky as he was feeling. You know,
oh,
I'm an engineer. I'm not good at the psychology part, but but I know there was something really unhealthy going on, and I hope as a society we can work towards getting more comfortable with when we don't like how we feel. How is it that we cope? Because torturing another person is not an acceptable coping mechanism.
no. No, I feel like there are a lot of people that really have a hard time with rejection. That's something that a lot of people don't hear the word no, and when they do, it's like their world ends. So I can imagine that he did not take that very well if his coping skills were not in place.
You know, I think, and this is again not coming from a place where I'm trained in psychology, but I think it's not just specifically rejection. It's any feelings that we don't like. It can be coming from unhealthy dynamics in a family or a relationship or a work situation, but I think some people are choosing a coping mechanism that numbs. So a drugs or an alcohol or a doom scrolling or an obsession with video games. I think that's a way to numb a feeling you don't like. And for other people, they have a feeling they don't like, and so they want to replace it with one they do, which could be power, control, dominance. I think that's kind of how all these different things we're struggling with as a society start to tie together.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, you said that that was someone that you dated and it didn't really work out. Is that typical for stalking? Have you learned kind of what stalking typically looks like?
Well, I wish there was a typical stalking. It would be so easy to deal with it if it was A plus B equals C,
It's
and we
C.
can, minus D gets us back to neutral. That's not how it works. There are an awful lot of intimate partner stalking situations, but there's a ton of stalking that comes from um, estranged family members. And so sometimes it'll be a
Oh.
parent and a child that aren't speaking to each other. And one, even if it's not that they're trying to get a hold of the other person, they're going to all the different family members and, trying
Hmm.
to get information, trying to get invited to family events. Um, then there's an awful lot related to the sex trafficking industry. People that
Oh.
may desire to leave a world they've kind of been forced into or stumbled into, but people who are pulling the strings are able to create a fear in them that if they were to depart, something would happen to their family members, or they could never get away because they can always be found. And so stalking, all the same things that were happening to me really do show up in those same situations where someone's trying to leave. There's some stalking that's related to stranger on stranger. Someone sees someone else at a coffee shop, has a short interaction with them, and develops in their own brain that there's a relationship between them, or that they can convince that person to love them. Again, that is kind of a rejection psychology in my mind. It's just that the rejection
Yeah.
happened before the relationship even started. Um,
Feel like that's
not,
the Joe effect. If you've seen the show You, I don't know if you've seen that, but that is
I,
the type of stalking.
yeah, I
And
have not walked into it. I have not watched them, but I am aware of them. Uh, this doesn't seem like a good year for me to let myself go all the way back down into that memory hole. But
Probably not. But that is very similar to what you're mentioning, the type of stalking that is like a stranger where someone meets somebody and then they fixate on them. And they kind of create this relationship in their mind. And so that's what that show it kind of focuses on. And so I think when people think of stalking, a lot of times that's what their mind goes to now. It's become like a pop culture phenomenon because of that show, which is kind of scary if you think about it. There's all these people. That character is kind of written in a way where you almost root for him at times. And I feel like that can almost be a very harmful, or not almost, it is a harmful dynamic for those who have been through stalking and know that it's not glamorous and it's not all these Hollywood things. But some people watch it and they're like, oh, I kind of like this guy. And that I feel like that's scary because that probably does happen in real life where people meet these people and they're maybe charming at first and then it just kind of snowballs from there.
100%. I have heard so many stories. And that's the interesting piece is 1 in 3 women, 1 in 6 men are going to experience stalking at some point in their life. I hadn't really heard from anyone in my community about a stalking experience until it happened to me. But because I opted to fight back, I opted to engage my network in my support. Um, the number of people who came out of the woodwork, and then through all the public speaking engagements and interviews and articles, people who have come and just whispered their story in my ear, things that they had never shared before. It is concerning how many of us it's happening to. But I also want to emphasize the fact that all of us have a little of that element in us. That's probably why you connect a little bit and like that perpetrator in the show,
Yeah.
because they're a real person. They are. There's just a disconnect. It's either a coping skill issue or a reality skill issue in some situation.
To say it sounds like it's a boundary issue too a lot of the time. There's blurred lines for one of the parties where the other person's clear, the other one's like, I'm going to push these boundaries a little bit.
We all, in my own experience, I did not draw hard boundaries for a long period of time. And I honestly don't know. I can't rewind time and go back and watch replay video of it. But part of it, I think, has to do with conditioning and that we've had bad experiences. The first guy I ever broke up with, we dated mm, just like bare minimum. We talked on the phone every night and we'd like hang out every Friday evening. But when I ended it saying, hey, I'm 17, I'm leaving for college on the East Coast in a few months, I don't want to get any deeper into this. He went and in 6-foot letters through the tunnel, the freeway that goes through downtown for us, he wrote, Amber Rosenberry is a slut in 6-foot letters. 17, dating the first time I'd ever dated anyone. So that was just the starting point of learning not to just hurt someone's feelings. So you're talking about this boundary setting. I learned not to set really hard boundaries. I learned to soften things so that people wouldn't retaliate. And that is a big part of what I want people to think about and become more comfortable with is the real message they want to convey. What does your voice sound like and what message are you really putting out there? So there aren't any unclear boundaries.
I think that's really important to establish. And those statistics are really shocking. I had no idea that it was so prevalent. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men. That's crazy. I mean, that's massive. And it's funny how I feel like a lot more people have those experiences than you maybe realize, because I was sitting here and I'm, reading your bio and I'm looking at what you've accomplished, and it clicked in my head and I'm like, "Oh my god, you had a stalker." Like, I had a stalker when I was working somewhere, and he was a student in one of my dog training classes, and we kind of talked a little bit outside of class, and he wanted to date, and I wasn't comfortable with that, because it was a boundary that I was like, nah, this is like, not professional. I don't want to cross that line. Um, and like, he wanted to hang out. He wanted to take me to some nature preserve that I'd never been to before with a camera to go like look for animals or something. And I was like, absolutely not. This sounds like a serial killer documentary in the making. So I immediately was like, no, we really need to keep it professional. I've enjoyed speaking with you, but we really can't talk anymore. And then I was teaching a class, and this guy came and he dropped a letter in between the glass window, and there was like this long, essentially love letter. And I wound up taking it to my manager, and then there were other points where he would come in my class and I would literally hide in the manager's office because I'm like, this is really uncomfortable. And I thought it died down after a little while. And then one of my friends, I drove a very noticeable car at the time. And one of my friends was like, yeah, didn't you teach that guy with like the big fluffy white dog? And I was like, yeah, I did. Why? And she was like, I saw him walking his dog around your neighborhood. He must have followed your car. And I was like, okay, that's weird. It was so I completely forgot about that experience. Luckily for me, it didn't go past that. It didn't become something that was obviously very traumatic for me. But at the time, it was very scary. So I can imagine that these situations that go further than that could be life-changing for some women.
First of all, I'm sorry that happened because it imprints on you, even though until this moment you'd kind of put it in the past. It left a mark, kind of like something that happened
It
to me
did.
almost 30 years ago, left a mark on how I communicated and maybe didn't set a boundary that was as clear as it otherwise could have been. So I'm sorry. Um,
It's okay.
it's interesting when it is going farther than that. And the difference in that situation is he did have to follow your car. Unfortunately, he did figure out which neighborhood you lived in. But if you've had an intimate relationship with the person, I had to function on the belief that at some point while I was asleep, he had installed tracking software on my phone. I had to assume
Oh,
there were GPS
wow.
trackers on my car somewhere. He knew which bank I used. He knew which grocery store I shopped at. He knew exactly where I worked and which desk and which chair I sat at. So when someone owns weapons and they know exactly where you sit, which window, there is a level of fear that changes the relationship, especially between the person who's hearing the story and the person who's experiencing it. Because when you
Yeah.
haven't slept in weeks because you're that afraid, law enforcement who's trained to deal with immediate threats. Is anyone shooting at you? No. You're afraid he's going to come to your work? That's not danger in their minds. It's not a danger they're really
Yeah.
trained to respond to. And friends and family, even. They sound irrational. You haven't slept in weeks. You're not speaking coherently. You're assuming that this person is right around the corner. I have to say, it's more dangerous for the folks who have had that intimate relationship because of the amount of information that may have
Oh,
been
yeah.
exchanged between them. They may have joint banking accounts. So many of these are not dating. These are someone who's trying to divorce. And
Yeah.
especially in that process, there's a gray area between what's joint, like what's your personal email account and what's a joint account. And how can you really extract yourself from that quickly within the boundaries of the law? So there's an awful lot that ties into it, but there's a reason that in 74% of cases where there's a homicide between people who had formerly had a relationship, the victim was stalked first.
Oh, wow. Those statistics are terrifying. That's, I mean, I thought the domestic abuse statistics were bad. You know, my platform is all about nearly 40 or nearly 50% of women will experience domestic abuse at some point in their lifetime. I thought, 50% was bad, but hearing 74% of homicides is stalking, like, there's a very prevalent connection there.
Very prevalent, because that is the worst case of domestic violence. So you're looking at all the people leading
Yeah.
up to and getting to that point, but we could maybe move it forward. I mean, I
Yeah.
I am so grateful for the humans that were part of my safety and then my recovery process. But when I look at it, I really want to pay it forward, meaning I want to move it forward in the timeline. And I'm willing to bet you do also. Like, can we
Yes.
help people avoid getting into that relationship in the first place? Or can we help them see the red flag and get out? Or can we help create interventions where when the stalking starts, the intervention can happen early, where society hears the victim talk about this issue and law enforcement or the friends and family, people take action rather than just leaving the victim to resolve their own drama themselves.
There needs to be more focus, like you said, on the action instead of the reaction. So I relate 100% to what you're saying because I know in domestic abuse, there's a lot of resources out there for recovery. There's a lot of resources out there to help women get out, to help them rebuild afterwards, which is amazing. I'm one of those people that had to get out of domestic abuse and I love that there's those resources. But when you sit and you think about prevention of abuse and teaching the younger generation the signs of abuse and what to look out for. And I know my personal platform is all about confidence building because I've noticed through the women that I've spoken with in my own personal experience, confidence plays a huge role in being subjected to abuse because you won't find a confident woman that's in an abusive situation. It's just not, they prey on those that aren't confident. So raising girls' confidence is a huge part of, in my opinion, the prevention. And what I'm working to do is bring awareness and prevention to the younger generations to lower those statistics. So you mentioned, the kind of the same thing that you're working to stop it before it happens. What would you say is your biggest contributing factor that you're doing right now to really work on the prevention? Is it more awareness? Is there something specific for prevention? What would you say?
One of those three-headed monsters, and you just don't know which one to fight, to put your energy into fighting. You can hope that if you cut off one of the three heads, that's the primary and it will stop the whole thing, but
Yeah.
probably we have to attack all of them. So my focus for the last 12 months has been updating the laws, getting Oregon to where we even have laws so that the intervention can happen once you realize stalking is happening, the conversation and the response can start. But there's also, how do we help people on the front end? Like, how do we get out to as many people as possible and help them develop healthier coping mechanisms so they don't become the stalker? That one's big. That one is not
Yeah.
something that is in my future 12-month plan because there's a lot I need to learn
Yeah.
and people who know more about it than I do. But I definitely think getting laws updated, for the next 12 months, really spending time going and teaching people in all the places that are thinking about making updates, teaching them what I did, how I did it, what their government structure looks like, because I can't do all 50 states, 49. We have 49 left to do, but I can teach 49 people how to lead it, and then be a support person for them. So really tackling that part first. And then I have this ultimate end goal of how we're going to heal our society and how we're going to develop healthier mechanisms and how we're going to, ask schools to allow that to become more part of the curriculum. Because we ask them to get the right answer all the time. But we don't really talk about when you get the wrong answer, what do you feel like and how do you manage that feeling so that you can then become someone who can calmly find the right answer or find the right person to date, someone who actually wants to be with you.
I guess I didn't even think of that too with schools. I know that's, something that I've looked at obviously with my platform too with confidence building is you can start at like 4, and that's something I think life skills are something that is really lacking in our school system. Teaching the kids how to feel confident, teaching the kids healthy relationship signs because a lot of kids aren't necessarily having that modeled at home. If there's an abusive household, those kids are watching that, and that's the version of a relationship that they're being raised on. So I can imagine that, the green flag type of relationship things and healthy coping mechanisms kind of goes hand in hand with that. And obviously, stalking and domestic abuse go hand in hand. So I'd love to see the school systems have more of those life skills because you're right, we are always looking for the right answer and they're not teaching kids when they get the wrong answer how to cope with that. That is that's a really profound thing that really opened my eyes, to be honest, because I know as a kid growing up I always had a lot of pressure with school. I was one of those kids that was always trying to push the envelope, and you're absolutely right, I didn't know how to handle you know not the rejection, but the side where I didn't get the A. When I got a B, I was like, I'm like, holy cow, like, I don't understand. So that's really important, I think, and something that we definitely should look forward to more instead of focusing so much on the academics only, bringing back those life skills into schools.
The only reason I say it is because that is what I have had to teach myself in my later part of life. I actually started college in this special program where you get you get your engineering degree and your architecture degree at the same
Oh,
time.
wow.
Because that's what I wanted to be doing. But the difference is in the engineering classes, it was black and white. You got the answer right or you got the answer wrong. And if I didn't get it right, I knew how to go back and work it and work it and work it until I got to where I could get the answer right. But in the architecture classes, even just in the first basic level, they give you some design criteria and you work. I mean, they give you keys to the building and you stay up all night working on this project for weeks, months, and you
Wow.
present it. And there's this design critique. And even though you met every criteria, it was this tall, it was this wide, it had this percentage of windows, they don't like your design. There's just personal opinions about it, or there's someone who has 20 years of architectural experience who is giving you great feedback that you'll probably learn in levels 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the education program. But I wasn't there yet, so their advice was good advice. It's just I loved my design for what it was and where I was in my experience, and I met the checklist. The checklist. I love the checklist. I dropped out of architecture. I went and got a business degree instead. So I have an engineering and a business degree because at that stage in my life, I could only cope with getting the right answer. And it was in my 20s and my 30s and maybe still in my 40s. And I'm still continuously working to be comfortable with things not turning out the way I expected or wanted. So I'm very humbly saying we need to work on this because I know we don't come pre-programmed with these skills. I just wish that
and
it had come in earlier in my life.
it's ironic too, because, you're talking about the subjectivity of architecture, and you found yourself in a hobby, essentially, that is so subjective. I think I've talked about it on every episode of this podcast so far, is the subjectivity of pageant judging, and how it is so difficult being in the pageant world sometimes, because you can hit every criteria and hit every mark, and if that pageant judge is looking for something else, you could be perfect and you still won't get the crown. So it's so funny that you've kind of put yourself to the ultimate test and said, you know what? I didn't get that architectural degree, but I'm going to be in pageantry and I'm going to do this. So I think it might be full circle for you.
It really is. This is me coming back to that design critique in that first studio and being like, okay, bring it on. At least now I have 25 years more experience. And it's interesting how in the English language we define words differently. When you're talking about confidence and wanting folks to build confidence, I wanted to interrupt and turn into the host and be like, wait, how do you define confidence? Because I have a definition of it. I define confidence as when what's inside matches what's outside. So there's nothing that anyone could find out. There's no new information that could be revealed that would change how anyone perceives you or perceives the situation. So for me, I can be very confident that I did my best and that this is who I am. I did not come to the table as any characterization of myself, so that if I'm not the one that gets chosen, I wish I could change a piece of myself. If I know who I am, I
Yeah.
came to the table 100% authentic, then I'm just not the right person for that job this year. And that's frequent. I mean, all these people who've been rejected and then stalked people, you might have been great together, just not right now. They might have had something going on in the background.
Yeah.
Like, you might be right. There was a lot you had in common, but then you went and stalked them. So
You kind of killed
they're
that.
not going to be interested. But it's the same thing with pageantry. Like, it's maybe not right now. It's maybe I'm just not the right fit. That's fine. Who I am is still lovely because I've worked very hard to make sure that she is lovely and proud of herself and her character. So, what
I
is your
love
definition of
that.
confidence for the kids that you're teaching?
So for me, I have an actual a workshop that I launched that teaches them how to build confidence. And for me, my definition of confidence is a little different. For me, confidence is being secure in how you feel about yourself and being rooted in that. And I have 4 steps that I teach in my workshop. Self-care prioritized, because I fully believe that you will not be confident if you're not taking care of yourself. You're not going to feel the best, essentially. Exercising your skills, so practicing, because practice makes perfect. Listening to positivity, because we all have that evil little negative voice in our head that tells us, you can't do this, or you're not pretty enough, or you're not skinny enough. So not listening to that and listening to the positive. And then fake it till you make it, which is a little contradictory to your, confidence is the inside and the outside matching, essentially. Whereas with me, confidence is something that even if you have those moments of weakness where you're maybe not feeling confident, being like, nope, I'm going to bring out my inner Beyonce and I'm going to make this work. So that's part of mine teaching them is you're going to have moments. I think everybody has moments where their confidence maybe wavers and fluctuates. One day I'm feeling like, oh, I'm on top of the world. And the next day I'm like, darn, I'm not feeling the best about this. But if you bring out that inner diva, bring out that inner whichever diva you follow at that moment in time and fake it till you make it, you're going to come off confident. So it's similar, and it's funny how everybody interprets confidence. That was actually one thing I was going to ask you, was your definition of confidence.
Sorry.
So no, you're perfectly fine. But it is interesting because every woman that I talk to has a different definition of confidence. There's the one that you can get from the dictionary, but then everybody interprets it slightly differently. And none of them are wrong. You know, as long as you get to that same feeling where you feel positive about yourself, to me, that's confident.
First of all, I would say fake it till you make it's not inauthentic at all. It's
No.
I am confident in who I am. I just need you to know I'm confident in who I am. Like,
Yep.
I know I'm a good person. I'm a great person. Even if I have to play a little bit of a character in order to like take that
Mm-hmm.
next step and step out the door in the morning. Yeah. You just need that little motivation. But really, it's not anything inauthentic. It's just
No.
reminding yourself to show how proud you are of yourself.
I think I always kind of compare it to like Taylor Swift, and I also bring her up every podcast episode. So one day I hope she watches this because she's like an icon for me. But if you think about it, I'm sure she probably still gets a little jittery before she goes on stage in front of thousands of people, you know, but when she steps out on that stage, she's Taylor Swift. Like she's, you know, she can trip and fall down and she's still Taylor Swift. So
Yeah.
she's got to kind of play that character too. So I think, and her lyric is what made me think of that because she has a song where she says, fake it till you make it. And I did. And so that's kind of what I tell the girls is fake it till you make it. And you will, because you're bringing out that inner, you know, beast that says, I can do this. I feel beautiful. I feel great. And then nobody's outside influence can bring you down at that point because unfortunately, there's a lot of negativity in this world that we got to kind of combat sometimes. So, yeah,
Well,
that's confidence in a nutshell.
you've mentioned a couple things that resonate big time for me and match what I'm hoping to be working on. You were talking about that like positive voice and that negative voice
Mm-hmm.
and listening to the positive one. But one thing that I've talked about in counseling a lot is I don't have a positive voice. When you have that
Oh,
unhealthy family, you don't even know what the healthy way to say this would sound like because you've only ever heard it this way. So how do you ignore this one if it's the only one you've ever heard? So I feel like half the time I'm just getting, the person that I'm talking to say it the nice way or to look at the situation in a positive way. Because once I hear it, then my brain can start hearing it that way. Then I can start to
yeah.
develop that positive voice that's on my shoulder that I can listen to. But if you've never heard what that voice sounds like, how are you going to know what it sounds like?
I think you've come a really far way though, because you did mention that, you know, your version of confidence is the inside and outside matching. And when you go to pageants, you're putting your best foot forward and maybe you're not the right fit at that time, but you're still happy with who you are. So you've come a long way and you have built that positive voice. Although you may not realize it, she's there saying, I like who I am. And if they
Oh,
don't like it, that's okay, but I'm happy with who I am. So she is there. She may be quiet
oh,
sometimes, but she's
oh,
there.
I'm talking back. I mean, I'm 45 at this point, so I've got decades
You're like,
of
she's here now.
I've got decades, and I remember each of those little girls. You know those Russian nesting dolls where they're
Mm-hmm.
identical and they stack into each other? I'm that. I remember 40-year-old me,
Oh.
35-year-old me. We're talking about second chances, and my gosh, I think about at 29 losing a really, really, really close person and
Hmm.
how I dealt with that and the unhealthy relationship that I opted to walk into because I wasn't willing to cry because this person had passed away. But the guy who just punched the wall next to my head, that was a totally justified reason to cry. So crying felt good. There was a lot of grief in my life, but I wasn't willing to cry about something I couldn't change. I could cry about this. And for some reason, that relationship seemed like a good idea. I remember that girl. I remember her. And
Yeah.
then I remember getting run over by a truck and my arm was severed. It was about 11 months later that I could finally pick something up. I could look at it and reach out and actually
Wow.
grasp it. I had to relearn from scratch. First of all, we had to wait until the nerves reconnected to see if they were even going to reconnect. And then I had to retrain them how to function. So I've done this a couple times
Hmm.
already. I've been very disfigured by the world's standards of beauty. Um, and I've come to great terms with that because I was a good person with amazing people in my life that didn't run just because I wasn't fancy anymore.
Yeah.
Um, that's a big part of my own path. And so I have developed it. I know we all can develop that positive voice on your shoulder. It's just, it wasn't there in the earlier
Yeah.
parts of my life when I was going through architectural design critiques.
That makes sense, though. I mean, and that's a good insight. As I build this workshop and, I teach it to younger girls, and then I talk to older women that have been through experiences that, are not the little girls needing to build confidence. They're successful, strong, confident women. You hear it's almost like each, because it spells the acronym SELF, SELF. And so it's I talk to each woman and I hear which letter resonates with each woman. And it's so cool to see that, because before I even ask what confidence is to them, or, I ask him about things or we talk about that, a lot of times one of those things will be mentioned and it's like, okay, yes, we're on the right path. But you brought up an interesting point in that, listening to that positive voice, there may be some girls that I do have to help learn how to develop that positive voice. So thank you for that, because that's an insight that I maybe not, I definitely have had a negative voice in there for, a very long time. But I have always had that little, she was quiet sometimes, but I did always have her. Now I can maybe relate to girls a little bit more that don't have that voice. So thank you for sharing that, because that is profoundly helpful.
This
But
is what I love about pageantry, is every person I get to meet is trying. I
yeah,
said yes to this. I'd been working on the legislation for 2 years and I wasn't getting phone calls back. I don't know if you remember, but Oregon literally was on fire. Like, we had dumpster fires in Portland and the rest of the state had forest fires.
I
And
do remember that. That was not a good time for you guys.
knocking on doors and sending phone calls and emails, and I wasn't getting responses. So I met some women participating in one of the pageant systems that they were recruiting. And I was like, I can't, guys. I can't have my bad guy hear my name, see my name, draw any attention to myself. I can't have anything about me in the public eye. And then I attended their pageant. And I saw 36 women walk across that stage and talk about 36 things that were happening in Oregon that weren't ideal, and what they were doing about it and what we could all help with. Things like, we only had one school counselor for every 6 elementary schools. I sat in a room and was
Wow.
just so humbled and inspired. I said, okay, guys, find the system that I belong in. I'm not married, so I can't compete in yours, but help me find where I fit in.
I love pageantry for this reason, because there's so many women, and I'd love to see more women join pageantry, because I feel like I was dormant as a person until I found pageantry. Once I found pageantry, it pushed me to be the best version of myself, or to strive to be that version of myself. And so I felt like I was like a sleeping, I was a sleeping giant, and then I found pageantry and it kicked my personal growth into high gear. And that's something that I hope that pageantry can expand, because for a long time it was very specific beauty standards that could be in the pageantry world. And now we're really opening up. That's a huge reason why I love International Ms, because their beauty standard definition is so vast. They're focusing on what we're accomplishing and what we're doing. And they know that we're, busy women and we're all working on individual things. And I think that's so special. And I'd love to see other systems follow in their footsteps and expand that beauty standard, because somebody's weight or facial features or whatever it may be should not hold them back from being able to compete in pageantry. It's something that I think every woman that wants access to should be able to have access to it, because your caliber of friendships that you form at these pageants too. I'm speaking with you and you're working on stalking in Oregon, and then I'm speaking with this other woman and she's working on something in another state. And we're all sharing ideas and we're all kind of collaborating on how to make the world a better place. And that is so powerful. And I love that about the pageant industry. So I think that's really special that we're able to impact each other in that way, and we're not dormant. Our eyes are open and we're going, okay, here's a problem. and here's how I'm going to run a marathon to fix it.
Yes.
And sometimes those marathons are long, but we're running them.
But because of pageantry, we're not doing it completely alone. I
Mm-hmm.
can work on this piece of it. And yes, I want to work on the younger folks and developing the healthy coping skills. But if I'm going to be focused on the legislation this year, I need to hand that off to you. Like, I'll take everything I know or think about it, and I will let the woman who's doing that do that. I love that we are developing who's doing what, and my network now knows if I encounter someone who's dealing with a certain thing, I know who to introduce them to. Um,
Yeah.
it's an extraordinary connection that allows us each to be better at engaging folks who have an issue with the person who can help them solve their issue. I think that's extraordinary.
You always hear pageantry and you think catty, and you think big group of women, uh-oh, like this is not going to be good. You're putting women against each other. But I realized that the serious pageantry competitors don't feel like they're competing against each other. They feel like they're competing against themselves to be the best version. And it's made pageantry such a pleasant experience that I've had so far, because we're all just trying to do the best that we can for ourselves and making friends along the way. It's like I have more friends now as a 31-year-old adult than I did when I was younger, when I saw people every day, because I have girls that I can say, hey, blah, 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 and it's great. So I love what it's able to do. And I want to say a huge kudos to you, too, because I feel like there are not many women that can relate to the fear of visibility. And that is something that I have experienced and I struggled with, early on after my experiences with abuse. Was you're invisible for so long and you want to stay small and invisible because it kind of takes the heat off of you almost. And then you branch out of that and eventually you're like now I'm like, I have a voice and I'm going to use it. And if you're not ready to use yours, I'll be your mouthpiece if you need me to. That's where I'm at. But for you, stalking adds such an intricate level to that visibility issue, because like you said, you were saying, I don't want him to see, I don't want him to know anything about me. The bravery and the courage that you had to enter into the pageantry world, where we are purposely making ourselves very visible and trying to accomplish these huge things. You deserve so much kudos for that, because that takes an entire level of really courageous effort to be able to do that. So you should be so proud of yourself. And I am so proud of you, because not many people realize how much that really takes when you spend a long time trying to, avoid being seen. And then now you're going to rock that stage. And hopefully, you might wind up with a crown on your head. And then it's going to be like, look at this.
You're going to make me cry. I did not
Aw.
realize until you said those words how much. I mean, you are absolutely 100% right. But, I kind of numb it. It's not a feeling I love, so I just kind of numb it or pretend it's not affecting me. But to hear you say that, thank you. I needed to
You're
hear
welcome.
that. I
Yeah.
have an amazing army. I call them my army because they were willing to go to war for me. You know, it's a bunch of people who were willing to get on a plane and come into the courtroom, hold my hand when I had to face him. I couldn't have done it without my network. And so, just like you said, if you're not ready to say it, I will be your voice. I think
Mm-hmm.
most stalking victims aren't ready to say it. Um, I had people that were willing to back me up, who understood it, who were very strong and confident. But I don't think most stalking victims do. I think most stalking victims aren't the most confident or don't have the most developed networks. And that's part of how in domestic violence we see the people who have the worst experiences. So you'll be a voice, I'll be a voice. Like, we will just keep
Yep.
saying the things everyone already knows. They're just numbing it like I was. I was pretending it wasn't
Yep.
bothering me. They're pretending it's not a problem. We got to say it.
Absolutely. And I didn't realize how important it was to really have that voice until I started to be loud. I started to share my story about my second chance and meeting my husband and kind of starting my life over and showing how happy I was after I left abuse, that I started getting women messaging me out of the woodwork that I went to school with that said, "Hey, I just want you to know I watched your story and I left my abusive husband." And that was like, I cry every time. I still get those messages, and every time I get them, I bawl like a baby, because you don't realize how using your voice can have such a big impact, even when you don't realize it, and that was a huge reason why I started the podcast, was not only to share my story and to amplify my voice, was to bring women like yourself on that have important causes that need to be heard, and to give you guys a platform to say, here's what I'm working on, and this is an issue and it's important. And I think having those voices and not being afraid to use them. One of the segments that I'm going to start is allowing women to anonymously email me their stories of abuse or their stories of being assaulted. And then I will share them anonymously on the podcast, because I've had someone come to me and say, you know what, hearing your sexual assault story hit home for me, and I haven't told anybody this, but here's what happened to me, and come to me and say, I'm not ready to say it out loud to anybody, but I would hear it from you. So I've kind of developed this model of, I won't speak for you, but I'll speak on your behalf with your permission. And I think there definitely needs to be people out there that are willing to do that. And you're one of those people too. You're one of those people that says to other stalking victims, it's this rewarding experience when you have them come to you, as you've kind of mentioned, you had women come to you and tell you their story. That is such a important, and I can't even really articulate how that feels when you have somebody that comes to you and says, you shared yours, here's what happened to me. And I'm sure that probably had a profound impact on you as well, because I know for me that, like I said, I bawl like a baby when it happens. So I'm sure you can kind of relate that that's a very intense feeling when somebody does that. And sometimes I feel like we downplay what we're doing and the impact that we're making. Sometimes not my I have a neutral voice in my head too. It's not really positive, it's not negative, but sometimes it's just like, what are you doing? And then I have these conversations and I go, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. So, but yeah, I'm sure I didn't think of, how important it is for voices. And I love that you have women that come to you and share their stories, because that is one of my favorite feelings.
I never thought about it from the perspective of then reading it for them. I
Mm-hmm.
think of it as, because they finally said it once, I bet they'll start saying it again. Meaning, if this is,
Yeah.
I mean, like for you, that's an unprocessed part of your background. I feel like because you just
Yep.
shared your story today and hadn't thought about it in a while, it might come up for you a little bit over the next
Yeah.
couple days or so. But that's not a bad thing. Like
No.
processing things that are stuck in the background, I think is really positive. So every time someone shares a story with me, I just get excited for them, because I feel like they just unlocked, they just broke the dam open. And I
I
hope that
love
from that
that.
point, they're going to go out and be able to improve relationships they have with their people who maybe didn't even know like that it was happening at
Yeah.
the time. And so they can share that story. Once you tell the story the first time, it gets easier and it gets easier. So going out and taking this public role has gotten easier. And I hope that for everybody who shared their story. But I love this idea you've got of reading it. Like, if they're not ready to say it out loud
Yeah.
themselves, maybe hearing it, just like if someone doesn't have that positive voice, if they don't have
Yeah.
that ability to say their story, they need to hear it. They need to get to where they can hear their own story in a way that's not horror and panic and just crashing waves of emotions. If they can hear their story read from a place where it's something they've overcome, then maybe they can start to hear their own story in that way in their own head and have that positive voice
Yep.
too.
That's the goal, because I think too, I didn't think of it in the fact that once you say it once, you can say it more. I know that there's people like myself that are, I mean, I'm an open book. I'll say anything to anybody these days. But there are some people that are not like that and they're not comfortable with that. And so I want to give them a space where they can get it off their chest. You know, there may be a story that somebody hasn't told anybody and they don't want to tell anybody in their life because telling somebody in their life makes it real. But you can tell it to me anonymously and you can share it and get it off your chest. And then, like you said, hear it with something that they've overcome and a positive come out of it. And I think it will empower them too to help that healing process, because a lot of times we hold things in that we're not ready to hear out loud. And hearing it out loud may kind of force that healing to happen, which is a good thing. You know, it's uncomfortable. A lot of these situations and a lot of things that we talk about and I talk about on this podcast with women, they're uncomfortable. They're not things that are easy to talk about. They're hard to hear. They're hard to talk about, but they need to be in order to be the healthiest version of ourselves. So I love the concept, though, that you just brought up, where saying it once, maybe they'll say it again, because that's really important. And I think that's very empowering for women. I mean, obviously, our platforms are all about empowering women and empowering others. That's huge. Giving them an outlet to share their voice without having to say it, but also encouraging them to use it when they're ready to. So I love that you put it that way. You're
Just
so like insightful. Like I think I have things figured out. And then I talk with Amber and I'm like, oh my God, I didn't think of it that way. Like you're gonna become the voice on my shoulder. I love that.
like that's the kind of person and the kind of role that I want to have for people. So thank you. That's the biggest
You're
compliment possible.
welcome.
There's so much to that. I had a similar experience from my accident when I got run over by the truck. I
Hmm.
could talk about that ad nauseum. I could tell you the story, no problem. No, like emotional memories about it. And then one day, all of a sudden, I'm driving down the highway. I'm watching an 18-wheeler glide to a stop as it came down an exit ramp. And all of a sudden, the memories, the smell of the oil on the asphalt, the sound of the brake squealing, the excruciating pain, like excruciating pain, it all arrived. And this was 6 or 7 years, I think, after the accident had happened. I had to pull off the
Wow.
road and I was out of my car on my hands and knees hyperventilating because I was finally feeling the memories. And I think that's a huge part. I then worked as a construction manager. I was building for a hospital. So I got to go to
Hmm.
some of the things that were available to the doctors. So I attended a neuroscience lecture about PTS, like not just post traumatic stress disorder, just post traumatic
Yeah.
stress. And he was talking about how the different parts of our brain remember facts and remember sensations. So the emotions, the smells, the sounds, I didn't until that moment happened. All of those were batched together. And I look at it
Yeah.
like um, back in the day when there were silent movies or when the movies were still being shown in the theater, the reel had to start with the video and the soundtrack. Both reels had to play at the same time and they weren't always lined up. So the mouths and the sound didn't sync properly. And I feel like that's really what happens inside our brains is we know what happened. We can talk about it. Maybe we can talk about our abuse, but we've never felt it. We've never processed the emotions, the sights, the smells. I think it would be phenomenal for someone's story to be read out loud. So they're not the ones having to speak the words and the facts. They're the ones who can hear it and process it and deal with that soundtrack, the emotional reel. And that's what PTS, as they were describing, really relates to is if there's a stage of sleep where the video and the sound get batched together and put into storage. And so PTS is
Oh,
when you just have memories and sounds and feelings and they're all just floating around and they're not in their file together in a labeled file folder somewhere. There's as a storage room full of all weird sounds and emotions and memories. Um and so that happens so often for folks that aren't getting a lot of sleep. So if you are in an active war scenario, um, those are the folks who
oh.
are going to wind up with those unprocessed traumatic memories. And I think in an abuse situation, you're probably not getting great sleep. You're probably leaving those memories unprocessed, and you are creating an opportunity for them to watch the video and feel their feelings.
and
I
sync
love
up.
what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. It's all been born out of, I guess, a place of necessity, because being a survivor myself, I know what I maybe needed coming out of the scenario, and it wasn't there. I can stop it from taking like a decade and a half for somebody. I would love to do that, because it's not fun when you think you're over something. And I guess that's the thing about healing too, and I'm sure you experience it as well. It's never linear.
Oh
It's
gosh.
healing is such a roller coaster experience. You can think that, oh, I'm finally over it. I don't think about it. And then you're like, oh, I'm thinking about it to have that thought.
No, it's never done. You're never completely
Yep.
healed. You will have a scar forever. It will be a
Yep.
part of the new you.
Yep.
I have all these working bits and pieces, but there are scars that
Yep.
remind me, we are never going to fully heal, but I love that you're cleaning up that file room. Like those emotions and memories
Yeah.
and the incident have found each other. They've been,
They
filed
have.
together, and it cleans up that messy file room. Um, it's interesting how those things can be really helpful.
It is. I brought that up in therapy, and that was something that we talked about, I think last session or the session before, and it feels good. It feels like I'm sorting things that I didn't realize I forgot to put the book on the shelf. So I love that
Yes.
analogy, the file room analogy, but that makes a lot of sense. I'm obsessed with that whole nesting doll thing that you said too, because I think the only thing that I can think of that comparison wise you hear is like, oh, I'm an onion and I have layers. And I would much rather be a nesting doll that's different versions inside of me than an onion. So thank you for fixing that.
Onion analogy, because not everyone is familiar with the nesting dolls. But the thing with the onion is I feel like once you open it up, you can't
Yep.
close it back up. And
Yeah.
and that's not how it is for me. It's like I'm this
Yeah.
person, but sometimes one of the versions inside of me is vibrating a little more, is drawing a little more attention to itself. And so I have to remember it's not this version of me that needs to deal with this memory. It's 5-year-old me or 10-year-old me that has to deal with it in the way that you know she was dealing with it. So it's just a lovely part of the story where I can perfectly fine, I can take all the dolls out and I can play with 10-year-old Amber for a couple hours and like let her process something, and then we can pack it all back up and I can still go back to being me and coming back into the present and back into my life, as I am now, and just being very comfortable with the fact that they're all a part of who I am. I don't have to put her in my past. She's just here. She's one of the many pieces inside.
But you raised such an important thing that I think people need to hear. And that's that the past versions of you, it's okay that they're still inside of you. I think people think that oh, that's not me anymore. That's not me anymore. And I think your way of looking at it and saying, oh, no, that is me, but that's me from 6 months ago. And she's dormant right now.
Yeah.
Um, is a smart way to look at it, because it's 100% accurate. Like PTS, and I've been diagnosed with having PTSD several times throughout my life, and as one of those things, once I get to a certain part, I think, oh, I'm over something, and then I get hit with it again. So now that analogy makes sense for me, that that doll is in there, she's just quiet and she's dormant, and then sometimes she comes out to play, and we have to have a talk. I have to,
Yeah.
kind of smack her around a little bit sometimes, depending on the version.
Yeah.
But, they're all there. And I think that's a really healthy thing for people to hear too, because maybe someone's on their self growth journey and something happens and they feel set back into someone that they used to be. And they may
Yeah.
think of that as an overwhelmingly negative thing. But you're kind of putting out there, that's not a bad thing. She just has, a purpose and a role, and that's super important. I think that can save some people from feeling really negative, to be honest, because people may think, oh, I feel like I got thrown backwards and, this is negative, but you've kind of given it a positive spin. So I think that's something that a lot of people could take with them. The nesting doll analogy is, you've hit gold there for sure. I love that.
It really dials back to how I define confidence, because there's so many times where there was a part of my life I'm not proud of. I'm not proud of after Martin passed away the drinking and the unhealthy relationship I was in. I wish nobody had ever seen me in that state of my life. And so I might go a certain distance down the road and I feel like I'm, the better version of me. I'm out of that place now. But for some reason that memory comes back and I feel like I ruined my life. I feel like nobody could love me if they knew this about me. And that's really where that nesting doll concept comes from, is the fact that all of these are a part of me and I'm proud of her for trying to cope. She didn't choose the best coping mechanism at the time, but it was the best that she could grasp for in that situation with what she'd experienced in life at that point. And so my confidence is high that no one can find out that secret about me and judge me now, because I've always been upfront about the fact that she's one of the many parts of me. Um, that's who I am. If you want to know me, you got to know her, and you got to know her, and you got to know her, and you got to know her.
I love that. And that's, I think, a new concept that I may add to my confidence workshops is not only my steps are definitely key, but being able to reconcile the versions of you and being able to accept the versions of you. Because I don't think anybody can truly be confident if they have a version of themselves that they're not happy with or that they haven't accepted, because that version is going to haunt them. It's going to pull them down. It's going to be like a weight. If in order to feel fully confident, I think you need to reconcile and accept every part of you as a human. And that's something that I didn't really think of, to be honest, because, I was focused on building confidence, but that's an important aspect of maintaining confidence, I'd say, because you're going to develop new versions of yourself. And sometimes you may not like what develops and you've got to adjust it, but you've got to accept that version in order to get back to where you are feeling good about yourself. And I've had experiences with that recently. There's things that have happened that have knocked my confidence, and I had a hard time accepting those things. But now, kind of thinking it that way, you really do have to accept those things in order to feel whole again, essentially, with all versions of you.
My confidence is I showed you who I was, honestly and authentically. And if that's the person that you want to do this job, I can do this job. I don't want to show up, pretend to be someone else, get the job, and then have to pretend to be that person for 12 months. What an awful
Yep.
12 months that would be.
Yep, I relate. I've had people ask me something similar with, like, I have tattoos. So I have been asked, like, oh, are you going to cover your tattoos for the pageant? And I look at them and I'm like, absolutely not. And they're like, why? And I'm like, because I'm not covering them for every event that I'm going to, for everything that I'm going to do. You're either going to love my artwork or you're not, and you're not going to crown me. And that's okay. But I'm not going to cover them to better my odds of winning because a judge might not like tattoos, when I'm telling you I'm not going to cover them for any of the events that I go to as your queen. So you're going to have, an inked up queen, or if you don't want it, then, somebody else with tattoos. But I'm the same way. I'm like, nope, I'm going to be this way for those 12 months. So take it. The same thing with dropping weight. I've had people say, oh, are you going to try and lose weight for the pageant? And I'm like, no, because during my reign, I would gain it back because I like food. And I am not a gym person. So that's just, I'm fluffier. And I also have health issues that contribute to it. So if I did the drastic measures to lose the weight, it would come back naturally because I have like a sitting weight. But same concept. I'm not going to do anything drastic for a pageant, and I don't really think anybody should. I think there's a fine line between maybe trying to be the best version of yourself if you already go to the gym, continuing to go to the gym. If you want to train a little harder, go for it. But I hate to see women that think, oh, I'm going to be in this pageant, I need to lose 15 pounds to get into a smaller dress, or, I need to do this, or I need to have my hair a different way, or whatever it may be, because we need to accept ourselves as we are and feel good about ourselves and put our authentic selves forward. And it needs to be sustainable, because if you do win, do you really want to reign? Like you said, is something that you're not? No, absolutely not. That sounds miserable.
That sounds like an awful year. That's when we talk about mental
Yes.
health in this industry. I think that probably plays a factor in it. because there's so many folks that have put themselves on a path of being crowned based on how they appeared on stage on one day. And then they have
Yep.
another year that they are trying to sustain it. There are the things that are positive. Like I said, I think that the medical improvements from working on my posture have been fabulous. And
Oh
so I'm
yeah.
not saying to people, sign up for a pageant so you can improve your posture. I'm saying improve your posture whether you do a pageant or not.
Yep,
You know?
absolutely. As a former ballerina and horseback rider, I can tell you that posture really does make a huge difference. That was like
But
one of my favorite things is when I started walking runway and doing pageantry, I always had good posture and they're like, "You have really good posture." And I'm like, "Ballet and riding a horse will do that to you because you get yelled at so much. Keep your shoulders back that it becomes like a thing."
I think we're going to 3 hours because dancing and horses are my things also.
I
So,
love
most important question anyone has ever asked me. They asked, what made 5-year-old Amber joyful? What made her rush through her chores so that she could go do. So they had me rewind all the way back to when I was a 5-year-old little girl. What would make me that excited? And it was dancing, horses, and dress up. And to me, I've
There you go.
realized now that is the kind of gas my car takes. Some people need diesel, some people need high octane, some are electric cars, but I have to have dancing, horses, and dress up. And as long as I'm putting that fuel in, I have the ability to go long distances. I have the energy to power through. So you just hit my favorite. So now we can talk about dancing and horses for the next hour.
And I love that we get to have our inner 5-year-olds, do this thing that we love. I was the same way. I loved dressing up when I was little. I played with Barbies till I was probably like 13 or 14, which is really kind of embarrassing, but it's okay. But I would put my pretty outfits on my Barbies and I would play dress up when I couldn't dress up. So now as an adult, I get that 5-year-old version of me that gets to, and my answer was very similar. I always wanted to be a ballerina. That was like my number one thing. It's so much fun. I love to ask people this question. So self-care is different for everybody. So I love to ask my guest, what is your favorite version of self-care?
It really is, like we talked about, it's feeding myself the kind of fuel that this system actually operates on. Um, there are some things that are lovely, an Epsom salt hot bath, just a soak in a candle. This is funny. I always used to put a tiara on my head. I'd get in the bath, I'd put a crown on, so my posture had to get a little better. And you light a candle, and the tiara just amplifies that candlelight all around the dark bathroom. So you just like sit there soaking, and the Epsom salt and the warm water is drawing toxins out of your body. Yes, girl. You cannot put a tiara on your head and have that posture. You automatically sit up a little bit straighter because they used to make you walk
It's
with
true.
books balanced on your head. Once you're sitting upright, you breathe. Like your rib cage opens up, you breathe better. So tiara, hot soak with a candle, sometimes with like a meditation recording playing. Um, I think that is an element of self-care, but it's just a stopgap. It's just something that gets me through a day or two. What's really truly self-care
Yeah,
that's going to make 50-year-old Amber, 60-year-old Amber, 70-year-old Amber happy and healthy is fueling myself with the right things and the right people so that I'm preparing each of those versions of myself to be the best possible they can be. So an
I
Epsom salt
love
bath does
that.
not change the outcome for 80-year-old Amber.
I think that's so important though, because so many times like we hear of self-care as just like yesterday I had a self-care day and I went and I got a mani-pedi because my nails were fixing to fall off. So, that was like my self-care and I walked around Goodwill and I, just kind of puttered around for a little while. And that was my temporary version. I took a bath with Epsom salt soaked. And I started a book that I've been wanting to read for a long time. And that was like my self-care day. But you're right, it was such a short-lived kind of refuel because, my daughter didn't sleep last night and I woke up this morning quite frankly and I'm like that did absolutely nothing yesterday. But I love the concept of a short-term and a long-term self-care because that is so true. We do these things like a bubble bath or an Epsom salt bath that kind of temporarily refill us, but it's kind of like eating a protein bar or something where you just need that burst of energy, or eating a piece of candy when you need your sugar to go up, versus eating a balanced diet all the time to make sure that you're healthy. So I love that concept of having like a short-term self-care kind of thing and a long-term self-care, because you're right. If you're not doing things to fulfill yourself emotionally and mentally, you're not really doing yourself any good. So that's an important concept, I think.
I just had the like you've been having revelations. I just had mine. Self care is based on all the different nesting dolls. Some days it's 10-year-old Amber, and there's a self care that I need to apply for her. And days like you had yesterday, that was self care for your very current self. And there are other
Yes.
things that we can do that are self care for our future selves. And each of
Yes.
those need to be cared for. And we need to be paying attention to what do each of them need and are we giving it to them?
That I love that. It's like future care. There's
Yes.
self-care and there's future care. That is, we're gonna like trademark that. Nobody steal that. That's me and Amber's thing. You can't steal it. You're
It's
gonna see
on
it
the
all
record.
over. What are you future caring for yourself? Calling it now.
But you're not wrong, especially if you're talking to younger folks who don't fully comprehend that there is going to be a future version of themselves. If you're
Yeah.
10 years old, every year of your life has been 10% of your whole life. And so a year is astronomical. And 8-year-old you was a totally different person.
Yeah.
But as you move on, I am fully aware of the fact that there have been all these different versions of me, and there are going to be future versions of me. And so I make different choices because of that. So I love the possibility of you helping them understand that they are only at, if you're 10 years old, you are only at 10% of all the future days of your life. And so, what are you going to do, and how
Yeah.
are you going to set yourself up to have another 90% of life?
And it's so relative too, because if you're 10 years old, a year, like you said, is 10%. When you're 100 years old looking back, 10% of your life is a decade. That is so immensely crazy to think about, is that, a 10-year-old's blip in time is a year, whereas a 100-year-old's blip in time is a decade. That's Life is really too short when you think about it.
We started this conversation, and early on I was talking about in my 20s, in my 30s. I
Mhm.
now reference things in decades because I have so many of them, and so my perspective is more compartmentalized. It's not until you get there and you can start using that vocabulary, you're not going to say in my 20s, because that is half of your entire life.
Yeah,
You
that
know?
was 2 years ago, technically, for
Yeah.
me.
But you had younger, you had teens, and you had 20s, and that's it. I've
Mhm.
got younger, teens, 20s, 30s, and I'm well into my 40s. So I have different vocabulary around it. And that's something that I wish I had understood earlier and made choices in terms of the relationships I was choosing, in terms of the food and nutritional choices I was choosing. Future care. If we can get younger people to
Yeah.
understand how much more life is ahead of them, and I think that might be a big part of all the things you and I are working on.
I think we definitely as a society need like a vision shift, and I think we need to shift into thinking of long-term goals. A lot of times we think, well, this is a tomorrow problem. Well, before you know it, tomorrow's here. And I think shifting as a society from between nearsighted and farsighted and changing our vision of what the future needs to be is something that we can try and instill in younger generations. We talked earlier about like the confidence building workshops. You talked about teaching coping skills, getting things for their future instilled younger, because if you wait until it's a problem already, you're missing out. You're not getting so much more accomplished. I mean, we could really change the younger generation's lives if we're able to put things into perspective when they're younger and give them the tools going forward to not face the struggles as much so we can shift from a recovery society and correcting and being on the defense to being on the offense and getting ahead of it before it happens. So I'm hoping with my work, and I think definitely with your work, like you said, you have a three-headed beast, and right now legislation is definitely the most important, because you have to lay that foundation. It all comes full circle, and as we talk, it seems like everything kind of shifts back and relates back to where we're at and what we're trying to accomplish now, because we're recognizing the things that we've gone through and how to fix them. And I think as a society, if we do more of that, we'll really be shaping a safer future for our kids.
I call it so often, I call it my version of pay it forward, meaning I want to move it forward. I want to move
Yep.
the intervention and the protection. I don't want to just keep replicating the kind of support I received
Yeah.
after. I want to
Yeah.
move the support that I'm offering as far forward on the timeline as I can. And I love that you're doing that
I
also.
love
So I'm
that.
just preaching to the choir over here.
I think a huge thing and a big strength of ours, you and I and some of the other ladies that are in our system, is we've identified problems based off of what we've been through. And not only are we working to fix it in the current timeline, we're going back to the younger versions of ourselves and we're trying to fix it before it happens. And that is something that I think is immensely important and not addressed enough. I think everybody is always so tired and dumping resources into recovery and healing and fixing that it gets overlooked that, hey, if we attack X, Y, and Z, we won't have to do the recovery and all of that stuff of it. So one of the things that I think applies to both of us, and you'll probably hate this saying as much as I do, what is the question that 8-year-old Amber, or what is the statement with 8-year-old Amber, if you say, oh, this boy, he's really teasing me? What did you hear? I'm curious if it was the same thing that I heard.
Oh, he really likes you.
Bingo. Okay, so it irks me to my core, and it's something that I'm working very passionately to change. Women are raised hearing, oh, he's just being mean to you and he's teasing you because he likes you. It's a sign that he likes you. And then we as women grow up and we wind up in these relationships with these men that are mean to us and aren't treating us the right way. And even if it's not on a conscious level, I feel like subconsciously it's set in us very early. Oh, he's just being mean to you because he likes. So I'd love to see a society shift from that writing off, oh, he's just being mean to you because he likes you, to instilling ways that boys can learn early on to healthy express communication and affection. And I think that ties very closely to what your platform is, and anti-stalking measures is teaching them how to deal with those feelings and how to express those feelings in a healthy manner and those coping mechanisms.
I think a part of it is that ability to express it honestly, like, this is how I'm feeling, this is where I'm at,
Yeah.
but not expecting the other person to make that icky feeling go away. Being able to deal
Correct.
with the fact that it's an icky feeling, but because I tell you, no, I really like you and I'm sad that you don't like me.
Yes.
And now they've moved the ball over to the other person's court, and it's the other person's responsibility to make that icky feeling gone.
Yeah.
I think we do all need to be able to be honest. This is how I feel. This is where I'm at. I will deal with it. Like, I will work through this myself. I
Yeah.
think that's fair. Because profound observation, it's not just the boys teasing because they like a girl. We get the same
Mm-hmm.
messaging, both sexes, with
Yeah.
someone's jealous of you. A girl's being
Yep.
unkind to another girl, and she's jealous of you. A boy's being unkind to another
Yep.
boy. Oh, he's jealous of you. So really, it comes
Yep.
down to the fact that people can behave in negative ways, and it's our job to ignore it. That's been very much a part of how I learned and how I was raised, instead of setting a boundary that, no, you don't get to talk to me like that.
Yeah.
And so I really think that this isn't just a male female, boy girl. I think we have a lot of interpersonal issues, and what really comes
No,
out of it is,
absolutely.
if you're jealous of someone, or if you like someone but they don't like you back, you can tease them, you can be mean to them, you can act in a negative way. For some reason, all of it ties together, and that negative behavior is an accepted outlet when you are jealous or blah, blah, blah. It's just let
Yeah.
it go, let it be. But that's not a healthy way to deal with your jealousy or deal with your unrequited love. Um,
Yeah.
and also being on the receiving end, silencing yourself and letting it, having to just avoid it, take a different route to class to avoid it. It's all part of this giant unhealthy process that we've developed, and I'd like to see the conversation changing.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. It's not, it's something that I don't think is talked about enough. And I think there's so many people that are spread in so many different ways that it's maybe not something that's been identified as a real issue that needs addressing. But I think the work that we're doing is hopefully raising awareness and saying, hey, this is a real problem that we need to get ahead of. And hopefully in the future, we won't be seeing these issues anymore.
I love that. I love it.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me this evening. I had a blast, and we definitely need like some girl time, FaceTimes or something in the future because we can talk ballerinas and horses all night. So I hope that we get to keep this going, and I love that we've potentially developed a new friendship, hopefully.
Oh my gosh, I'm sending you the biggest cross country hug right now, as big as I can fit into the internet.
To see
It's
you in
one
less than 5
month.
weeks. I'm so excited. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me tonight, and I will be seeing you soon.
I will see you soon.
Thank you so much for joining myself and Amber on tonight's episode of Second Chance Queen, and I hope you enjoyed our conversation about everything important from confidence to stalking. Amber is doing incredible things for the stalking modernization, and what she's doing for the state of Oregon and hopefully the United States soon is incredible. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I will see you next time on the Second Chance Queen podcast.